Okay, I can imagine what you're thinking right now when you look at the title of this screencast, soil formation. You're thinking, boring. Oh my God, we got to learn about dirt. Okay, well, here's the thing. Soils are way more important to you than you may realize. You owe your life to them, and they're quite interesting in how they form and how they function. So let's just go ahead and learn about soil. Come on, be open-minded. Okay, soil, it turns out, has a lot of ecosystem service that it provides. So, primarily, the things it does first is this: it serves as a place where water is stored and that can then be used by different components of our ecosystem, primarily vascular plants. It serves as a filtration system that purifies water, cleaning out impurities and making it consumable to us and safe for us to consume. It serves as a place where a lot of different organic components and inorganic components can be recycled. So it allows for nitrogen and phosphorus to be recycled. And also, it serves as a place where roots can take hold and extract moisture. So it's got a lot of important roles it plays. You would not be here without it. The entirety of all terrestrial life depends on soils. Now, let's just start looking at a couple of things to do. First of all, they store a lot of water. Okay, so soils, even soils that may seem to you to be fairly dry, have a lot of water in them. In fact, most, like 10 times as much water is stored in soils than is found in all the rivers of the world. So it holds a lot, and basically this water is mostly stuck to the finer particles that are present in soil. So the finer particles we'll learn later in this presentation are clays and silts. And another thing that soil is important for is it provides a structure with which these vascular plants can build their root systems that gives them support and allows them to extract water from the soil. So the water that's present in the soil works its way up into the green part of these plants and then is available as one of the main components of photosynthesis. Now, soils are both porous and permeable. So when we say something is porous, what it means is this. Soils are essentially collections of mineral particles that are a variety of sizes, mostly fairly small. And in between these minerals, which are shown here in brown, there are these holes. Now, these holes we refer to as pores. So when you have a lot of these holes between the particles, we say it has porosity. Now, the pore space can be filled with air or water typically. And so if it's mostly filled with water, we say it's a wet soil or a saturated soil. And if it's mostly filled with air, we say it's a dry soil. But keep in mind, even soils that to you and I seem very dry, like it hasn't rained in months and months and months, there's still a significant amount of water stuck to these mineral surfaces inside the soil. They're amazing reservoirs of water. Now, one of the common components of most soils is it's called clay. It's made out of basically uh, these type of silicate minerals that decompose in these really small particles. And these small particles that we call clay tend to have a surface that has a net negative charge to it. And so what happens is they have a tendency to attract both water, which has if you recall from chemistry, it's a polar molecule that has a negative side to it and a positive side. So the negative side, the oxygen side of it, sticks to the clay particle, which allows it to hold on to water a lot, but also to a lot of positive ions. So, and this is one reason why clays are good at filtering materials out of water. Which is what the next slide was about. Okay, so and not only that, but also it provides a surface on which a lot of bacteria can live because there's water, and these bacteria are often good at breaking down certain uh, contaminants and pollutants that might otherwise just stay in the water. So um, the clays provide water, and that water allows bacteria to live, and that bacteria is able to break down and purify water, as can fungi. Okay, well, let's just talk about how soil gets made in the first place. If you recall, when we talked about primary and secondary succession. We said primary succession takes a long time because of how long it takes to form soils. Well, here's how it works. You start off with rock, let's say lava from a lava flow. It rains on it, there's cracks in it, and basically what happens is the rock slowly disintegrates. So why does it disintegrate? Well, mostly because you have uh, chemical action that dissolves these particles, and you have mechanical mechanical process that can break it up into these smaller chunks that we see here. All right. And then once we have the smaller chunks, then there's a way for lichens and other things to start growing on top of it. And then that provides dead material, makes this little organic layer, which then starts to work its way in. And over time, what happens is we dissolve and break up more of these particles here until they're very small particles that don't really look like rock to us anymore. And now we have a soil horizon formed in which now plants with roots can start to grow. But if we keep going down, we'll find that the rocks get bigger and bigger and bigger until we're back down to the bedrock we started with. And that's basically what soils are. We have layers of material that were once bedrock that are broken uh, to smaller particles and acquired some organic material from above. And we're going to talk a little bit more details about how these different, what we call horizons of soil operate. Okay, well, let's just start with the beginning part. The mechanical process by which rock turns into soil is something you can observe just walking through the trails, around soil. My wife and I go hiking all the time around here, and I'm always like, oh, that's a perfect example of it here. So you'll see trees growing in cracks in the rock. So basically, rocks often have cracks in them. In these cracks, a couple of things happen. One is just the day-to-day change in temperature causes when things get hot, they expand, and when things cool, they contract. And that process of expanding and contraction increases the size of these cracks. Now, into these cracks, water will get, and in places where the water temperature gets, where the soil temperature gets below freezing, ice wedging occurs. So when water turns into ice, if you ever left a can of soda or something in the freezer, you'll notice it explodes. And that's because water is one of the few substances that really gets a lot bigger when it freezes. Uh, and then also your plants work their way in here, and then you can get water and wind moving through here can also abrade and break off smaller particles. And that's basically how it starts. Now, uh, the mechanical process by which the rock breaks down, it doesn't really change the chemical makeup. What it really changes is the size makeup. So basically, what we've got is from large to small, we've got gravel, uh, and we have sand, and then silt is fairly small particles, and then clay. You wouldn't even be able to see at the scale here, but it's there, and they're all part of the same parent rock. And so, like each of these is basically all a part of the rock we started with. They've just broken down into different sizes. Chemical weathering is basically the action of water, usually because of low pH, that rainwater is slightly acidic, and as it penetrates, it tends to dissolve certain minerals, especially these ones called feldspars, which are pretty common in a lot of rocks. And these feldspars, uh, as they essentially react with rainwater, they turn into clay material. So the clays we see are the result of water acting on certain components of the rock. There are the components that are known as feldspars, and we call this the chemical weathering of the rock. And it results primarily in the formation of clay minerals because the sand and the silt is typically made of things that are resistant to the type of chemical weathering that we find from water percolating through these materials. Now, it takes a long time to turn rock into soil. We said before, it can take thousands and thousands of years just to make enough for a single tree to grow. Now, if you think about it that way, uh, that makes it a pretty precious thing. We need it. It provides us with so much. Basically, we can't have food without soil, and soil takes a long, long time to make. So that makes it a precious thing. We tend to think of it as just dirt, as something that's kind of worthless, but actually it's a precious resource. And it's one that we really need to give some thought to how to manage because without it, we're in trouble. Uh, so now let's talk about soil horizons. And this is something that's on the test. This is a little bit, tricky here. Okay, so we gotta push our way through this. Horizons just mean layers. Okay, first of all, that's all we mean, layers of soil. We call them soil horizons. And basically, it's what we find between the surface and the bedrock down below. Now, a soil profile is basically a description of how these different soil layers or soil horizons appear to us at a given location. So it's almost like a fingerprint. We say, well, the soil horizon in Seoul might be different than the soil horizon here in Songnam, and so on. It just has to do with a variety of things, like what type of bedrock, what kind of biotic factors and abiotic factors come into play. But there's a certain character that is found in what's called a soil profile. So usually we have four distinct horizons between the organic horizon at the surface and the bedrock down below. So we call the organic part of the top the O horizon, and this is basically just like dead plant material, decaying roots, leaf litter, pine needles, things like that. And then below all the soil, we have the R layer, which is just the bedrock, the rock that was originally there that eventually broke up to make the soil above it. Now, keep in mind, soil doesn't necessarily stay put. Sometimes the soil you have moved from somewhere else. You got carried away by rainstorms, and you see, rainwater carrying soil all the time. But for right now, we're just talking about it forming in place. So the O horizon is this dark layer of organic matter that we call humus, not hummus. It's not the stuff that you eat with pita bread, but it's humus, uh, and we call it the O layer. And basically, it's just primarily decomposed plant matter that's very, very high in nitrogen, and so it's pretty important. Pretty important in terms of plant growth. Now, the A horizon is the one below it. It's the one that's directly below the organic horizon. And this is one that's really very alive. There's a lot of things living in this part. We sometimes call it the topsoil. Uh, and it's got a lot of organisms living in it. It's got the roots of plants. It's got worms. It's got burrowing animals. It's got insect larvae. It's like there's those wang 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 that you hear in the summertime. Though those creatures live in the soil for years before they come out and make those sounds. Um, so the A horizon is just the layer directly below the O horizon. Now, here's our O horizon, the organic material, the dead, in this case, dead grass material, dead grass roots. We have the A horizon right below it, which is fairly rich in accumulated um, organic materials. And then below that, we get what's called the E horizon. So the E horizon is fairly light in color. So if you see a picture of it, if it's very light colored, we know that that's the E horizon. And it's basically the reason it's light is it doesn't have much organic material, it doesn't have much clay in it. Clay tends to be kind of reddish. Organic material tends to be darkish. It's very light colored, and that's because rainwater has had an ability to leach out the organic materials and the clay materials from it. And that takes a long time. So when we see this horizon here, this E horizon, it tells us this is a very old soil. It's been there a long time, and it's not always there. And a lot of times it indicates a lot of rainfall. The B horizon is sometimes called the subsoil, and it has this kind of reddish color because it tends to accumulate the 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 iron, the aluminum, the clay, and things that leached out of the E horizon end up in the B horizon. So the B horizon is basically where a lot of material is illuviated or captured, sort of filtered out like a coffee filter. And then the C horizon, which is also called the substrate, is the transition zone between the bedrock and the soil itself. So it's basically like bedrock that's kind of broken up. It's lots of rock material there with very little in the way of soil material between it, which is kind of a gradational boundary. Okay, so let's take it from the top, so to speak. O, organic, humus. A, also known as the topsoil. So it's got a lot of living creatures. It's got a lot of organic matter mixed in with it that came in from above. E, the illuviated horizon. It's been leached of most of its iron and organics and aluminum, and so it's very light sandy color. It's mostly sand and silt. Below that, we have the B, or the subsoil. So this is where a lot of the material that got leached out of here ends up captured. So we have a lot of accumulated iron and clay, which gives this reddish color. Then below that, we have the C, which is basically mostly broken up bedrock. So it's more rocky than it is soil-y. And below that, we have the R horizon, which is the bedrock. So those are soil profiles. Now, let's just talk about different types of soils that are found around the world. So soil forming factors vary from biome to biome. It varies with different abiotic and biotic factors. Soils get categorized into 12 types. But we're not going to learn all 12. We're just going to focus on a few of them that are of particular importance. Okay, so let's start with Spoda Soles. Spoda Soles are found in the taiga biome You see here, I can see we got our leached horizon here. We got a thin layer here. So the A horizon has a lot of uh, pine needles to it, and so well, at least a lot of material from the pine needles, and so these pine needles tend to make the soil very acidic, and that aids in leaching. And as a consequence, because we leach so much out of the soil here, it's not particularly good for agriculture. There's not a lot of nutrient value in the soil. Alphacells are found in deciduous forests, like what we have here in Korea, at least around us here. Now we find here is the O horizon here is made out of decaying leaves, which is great. They're very high in organic material. Uh, but there's usually, if you have a deciduous forest, there's a pretty high rate of precipitation. So that means you're going to leach out a lot of the organics yeah, out of the organic A and E horizons. And so that the rainwater tends to leach this out. So again, these are not always the best soils for agricultural purposes. Well, then what are? Well, what are called mollisols. So mollisols are found in a grassland biome, and here you have a very, very, very thick O horizon because you just have all these rotting root materials. There's not a lot of precipitation. Remember, that's why it's a grassland. Since there's not a lot of precipitation, there's not a lot of leaching. So that means we don't have a very distinct E horizon. Um, and therefore, a lot of the material are able to stay in the upper part of it and be available for plants to access. So these tend to make very fertile soil. So molosols, they're great. Aritasols are basically what you find in arid environments like deserts. And so what you find there is that there isn't a no horizon. There's no buildup of dead material to make an no horizon. There's no organic material there to begin with. And when it does rain, there's a lot of, even if water gets in the soil, evaporation tends to bring it back up to the surface, and it tends to dissolve materials here and make a layer of sort of a salty crust layer here. So the salt can the salt can penetrate all the way down into the B horizon, make it really very difficult for things to grow in. Oxisols are what we get in a tropical rainforest. Now, tropical rainforest you would think would be very great for growing things, but it turns out they're not, and for a couple of reasons. There's not much in the way of an O horizon because there's so much recycling of the decay material by living things, and there's a high rate of rainfall, and that means there's a lot of leaching. So a lot of the nutrients that would be here get leached out, and so there's just not much in the way of nutrients in these soils. Then we have andosols. Now, andosols are ones we associate with volcanic activity. In this case, the parent material, rather than being bedrock, is volcanic ash, which is a lot easier to get started with in terms of uh, what's the word I'm thinking of in the succession. There you go. Okay, but volcanic ash has a lot of phosphorus in it, so these things tend to be very rich in nutrients because they have a lot of phosphorus in them. Yeah, that's it for soils. Sorry if you find them boring, but they are important and they do get hit pretty hard on the test.